Mr. Six's full name is Tristan Dunn, and he is the sixth child in his family. Because of his ruthless actions when he was young, and his fearless demeanor, he quickly made a name for himself in the underground world of J City within just 2 years, earning the respectful title of Mr. Six. According to Ginny, Mr. Six would be hosting a dinner for the heads of other cities' underground organizations today. Since Zane found out about this late, they had already finished the first part of the event and were now at the second venue, Galaxy KTV. Ding! Storyshots reminds you to click the subscribe button at the bottom right corner to read the full novel. Galaxy KTV is famously known as a money-burning pit. Just the appearance fee for an average hostess is as high as $2,000, which is more expensive than the prices of hostesses in regular clubs. The top hostesses here charge up to $10,000 per hour, and they only drink with you without allowing any physical contact. Zane had heard about it before but still thought these rich people were crazy. With so much money, wouldn't it be better to keep a mistress? Why waste it on these top hostesses without getting anything in return? One can only say that Zane could not understand the world of the wealthy. Walking into Galaxy KTV, Zane was stunned by the interior decor. Luxurious and extravagant to the extreme. All the hallways in the lobby had staff with long, exposed legs and strapless dresses, and their looks were quite striking. A handsome waiter approached and politely asked Zane, "Sir, do you have a reservation?" Zane shook his head. The waiter frowned and said, "I'm sorry, sir, but without a reservation, this place is." Zane interrupted him, "I'm here to see Mr. Six." Hearing this, the waiter scrutinized Zane for a moment and then said, "Please follow me, sir." Zane followed him. They took the elevator to the 7th floor. The waiter led Zane to a private room door, indicating that he could go in. Zane took a deep breath, and it was impossible to say he wasn't nervous. After all, the person inside was the infamous Mr. Six of J City's underground world. Legend has it that he kills without blinking. But soon, Zane calmed down. He was no longer the ordinary person he used to be. His palm clenched slightly, and a flash of black flame appeared in his hand. Pushing open the door, he saw that the private room was large. Almost 800 square meters, with a swimming pool and a billiard table inside. It was hard to believe this was just an ordinary private room. On the sofa sat a group of people. About 20 or more scantily clad hostesses surrounded a few men. They seemed to be discussing something while sitting on the sofa. One man stood out, bald, with a burly build and a fake right eye. The blue eyeball hanging there gave a very frightening impression. When everyone saw Zane enter, the guys playing billiards all stopped what they were doing and stared at Zane with unfriendly eyes. Mr. Six pushed the woman off his lap and asked with a smile, "Bro, who are you looking for?" Next to him was a man in a suit with a cold demeanor, showing no sign of paying attention to Zane. Zane took out the contract prepared by Faith Heron and said softly, "Mr. Six, it's time to settle the final payment." Upon hearing this, the smile on Mr. Six's face instantly disappeared, and he said impatiently, "If you want the final payment, let Faith Heron tell me herself. Miss Heron is very busy, and such a small matter is not worth her personal attention." Mr. Six squinted his eyes. "A small matter?" Zane nodded. All the men around them gathered closer, ready to act on Mr. Six's command to take Zane down. Images of his dreams flashed in Zane's mind, and his gaze became icy. "What you mean is, in Faith Heron's eyes, I'm just a small matter." Mr. Six's eyes were dangerous, especially that fake eye, which seemed to emit a cold light. Zane exhaled deeply. "Isn't that the case? Damn you, who do you think you're talking to?" A man behind him lunged with a pool cue aimed at Zane's head. Mr. Six did not stop him and watched coldly. It was as if Zane had eyes on the back of his head. He slightly shifted his body, dodging the attack. The pool cue hit the coffee table heavily. As the attacker was about to strike again, Zane suddenly grabbed the pool cue and, with a slight force, pulled the man toward him uncontrollably. Zane trapped the man's head under his arm, then grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the table and smashed it on the man's head. The whiskey bottle was hard, even harder than a brick. This strike directly made the man's eyes roll back, and he fainted. Zane let go of him and looked at Mr. Six. "I know Mr. Six is famous in the underground world, but you're getting old. The older you get, the more afraid of death you become. But I'm different, I'm young, and I have the same recklessness you used to have. If Mr. Six makes things difficult, I'll play along with you. Who do you think you are, to play with me?" Mr. Six's eyes flashed with cold light, but he didn't order his men to continue, as Zane had just demonstrated that he was not an easy target. Zane chuckled softly and poured himself a glass of whiskey, I know people like Mr. Six value face a lot. My actions just now made you lose face, and I apologize. As Zane was about to drink, Mr. Six reached out and grabbed his glass, then handed him the whole bottle. Zane paused for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Mr. Six. Everything you said is right, but there's one thing you got wrong. Although I'm old, I'm definitely not afraid of death. Mr. Six looked at Zane with a mocking expression. First, a slap, then you drink to apologize. You've done it all. But I'm not a fool. These tricks are enough to show your sincerity, but not much else. After a pause, he continued, drink this bottle of wine, and I'll consider your apology. Then we can continue talking. Zane's eyes lit up. He was willing to talk, which was a good sign. Without wasting any words, Zane picked up a bottle of foreign liquor and downed it without hesitation. He had drunk before, but never something this strong, and never this much. After finishing the bottle, he felt his throat burning and his vision blurring. Good. Mr. Six laughed loudly. Now, I'm starting to like you a bit. I won't hold it against you for hurting my bro. Now, you can leave. Zane placed the contract in front of Mr. Six, the final payment. Mr. Six was starting to get impatient. Hey, I see you know the rules and have some means. I'll give you a chance to live, don't throw it away. As he spoke, two people came over, ready to drag Zane away. Zane sat still, no matter how hard they pulled, they couldn't move him an inch. After a while, Zane raised his head, a strange smile on his lips. Mr. Six, I advise you to settle the final payment immediately, otherwise, things will get out of hand soon. Mr. Six's eyes darkened. Are you threatening me? Why wouldn't I? You are seeking death. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone behind Zane lunged at him. Some grabbed bottles, others pulled cues, anything they could get their hands on. Mr. Six sat on the sofa, looking like he was watching a show. But soon, his expression started to change. About 3 minutes later, Mr. Six's initial calm turned into shock and fear. Around 20 people lay unconscious beside Zane. He sat back down, pushed the contract towards Mr. Six, and smiled. Can we settle the final payment now? Mr. Six stared at Zane in horror. He had seen clearly how Zane had moved. Among the 20 people, Zane moved as if he were taking a leisurely stroll. Every hand wave, every foot lift, someone would fall unconscious. The man in the suit beside him was now looking at Zane with bright eyes. He had remained silent until now, but at this moment, he spoke. Tristan, settle it with the young man. You can afford it. Mr. Six, finding it out, immediately said, I'm not afraid of you. I'm just giving face to my friend. Otherwise, with one call, 100 people would come and tear you apart. Zane laughed. Then thank you, Mr. Six. Mr. Six smiled, looked at the account number on the contract, and neatly settled the final payment. Thank you, Mr. Six. I'll take this drink as my apology for injuring your brothers. After speaking, Zane poured himself a drink and downed it in one go. Mr. Six laughed heartily at this sight. Bro, you've got some skills. At these words, some people immediately understood what was happening and hurriedly called in a group to carry out the unconscious men. The hostesses who had been hiding in the corners quickly came over, with two women even sitting beside Zane, intimately holding his arms. Zane frowned but said nothing. He didn't want to completely offend Mr. Six. After all, Mr. Six was a big shot in the underground world, and in the future, Ginny would have to deal with him in business. If he completely offended Mr. Six, and Mr. Six secretly sabotaged Ginny's business, it would be very troublesome. So, after Mr. Six finished speaking, Zane took the opportunity to start a conversation with him. After a few drinks, Mr. Six was already calling Zane his friend. They seemed like they had become friends through a fight. Through their conversation, Zane learned the name of the man in the suit, Connor Borer. He was the big boss of the underground world in B City. Very influential. But now, he was calling Zane his friend. From the initial politeness when he entered, to taking out the contract with a strong stance, to apologizing, fighting, and making amends. Through these actions, Connor saw Zane as an extraordinary person. Especially with such impressive skills. They were now just short of becoming sworn brothers. Zane had drunk quite a bit and couldn't take it anymore, so he headed to the bathroom. He was indeed drunk and had forgotten that there was a bathroom in the private room. After washing his face in the bathroom, Zane finally sobered up a bit. He looked at the time. It was already past 9 in the evening. It was about time to go back. Zane was about to say goodbye to Mr. Six. Just as he was about to push the door open, he noticed a young man grabbing a woman's hair and viciously dragging her into the private room. Zane initially didn't plan to interfere, but when the woman lifted her head, he was stunned. April Salazar. His high school classmate. He was an orphan, raised in an orphanage. But he worked hard and started working part-time after he began school. While earning his living, he also saved money for school fees. For the sake of tuition, he only dared to eat one bun and drink a bottle of water each day. Because of his poverty, he was self-conscious and didn't dare to make friends. Of course, no one proactively made friends with him either. But there was one exception, and that was April Salazar. Although she didn't proactively make friends with Zane, every noon, she would bring him a portion of pickled vegetables. Later, in Zane's heart, she became his only friend from high school. Even if it was just his own perception. Seeing her being bullied now, he seemed to taste the pickled vegetables from high school in his mouth. Without any hesitation, he quickly walked over. He pushed open the private room door and saw the young man pressing April onto the coffee table. 2 other people were holding her hands and legs. Her skirt was already pushed up to her waist. Her underwear was pulled down to her ankles. And the man was unbuckling his belt. A flash of red appeared in Zane's eyes, and he quickly kicked the young man away. With a bang, the young man crashed into the television. The expensive and luxurious TV shattered upon impact. The 2 others came to their senses, grabbed bottles, and charged at Zane. Zane snorted coldly, dodged to the side, and smashed the bottles on their heads. Bang! Bang! The 2 of them immediately fell to the ground, blood flowing uncontrollably. Let's go! Without even glancing at them, Zane pulled April along after she dressed and started to leave. However, as soon as they reached the door, a group of people came running over. Their hair was dyed in various colors, all of them were small-time thugs. Caught him, then kill him. The young man emerged, clutching his head, his eyes glaring at Zane venomously. Hey, wait, Mr. Bear. Let's talk this out, no need to fight here. The KTV manager came out, wearing a fawning smile. Zach Bear slapped him and cursed, "Go to hell. I'm spending money here, and your people not only didn't let me sleep, but also found someone to beat me up." The KTV manager looked at April Salazar, who had red, tear-streaked eyes full of humiliation. He walked over, raising his hand to slap her. Zane grabbed his wrist and coldly said, "What are you doing?" The KTV manager glared at Zane and said, "She's our company's artist. What I do is none of your business." April Salazar, come here. April trembled all over, bit her lip, and finally shook off Zane's hand, walking over in humiliation. Zane frowned but didn't stop her. The KTV manager sneered at Zane and slapped April's face. A red and swollen handprint immediately appeared on her fair face. "You still want to work here, huh? You dared to get someone to beat up Mr. Bear? I'm telling you, you won't get paid this month." Hearing this, April raised her head and cried, "Manager, my mom is still waiting for the money for her treatment. Please, don't withhold my salary. If you want your salary, fine. Apologize to Mr. Bear right now." April glanced at Zane and then walked over to Zach Bear, saying, "Mr. Bear, I'm sorry. It's your honor that I took a liking to you, and you dared to get someone to beat me up? I'll kill you." As he spoke, he kicked April in the stomach. She staggered back and fell at Zane's feet. Zach Bear was about to continue beating her, but when he saw Zane, he hesitated and cursed, "Get over here." April got up and started crawling towards Zach. Zane couldn't take it anymore and stopped her, saying, "April, does your mom know you're degrading yourself like this?" April looked up, her eyes filled with tears. Zane looked at her and remembered the pickled vegetables, softly saying, "How much does your mom's treatment cost? I can lend you the money." Hearing this, April trembled, a glimmer of hope appearing in her eyes, but it soon dimmed. "I don't know, it's a bottomless pit." Zane took a deep breath and asked, "I have a way, but please, stop degrading yourself, okay? Hey, mister, you haven't resolved the issue of beating our customer, and now you're trying to take away one of our company's artists? Do you really think our Galaxy KTV is a pushover?" The KTV manager said coldly, and the people behind him surrounded them. Zane gave them a cold look and then said to April, "Answer me." April looked at Zane's face, her eyes filled with pain. She desperately wanted to leave, but if she did, no job would pay enough to cover her mother's expensive medical bills. She was about to shake her head when she saw the disappointment on Zane's face. She gave a bitter smile. What did it matter? She was already in the mud, how could she walk out clean and tidy? I need money. April said. I can give you that. Zane said. Why? Without hesitation, Zane replied, to repay you for the pickled vegetables. April's expression became dazed. After a moment, she was about to shake her head. I'm taking her with me. She won't work here anymore. Also, give her her salary. Zane said coldly to the KTV manager. The KTV manager laughed in anger. Buddy, are you still drunk? You beat up my customer, and now you want to take my employee? Are you really not putting me in your eyes? Zane didn't respond and was ready to fight his way out. At this moment, a voice sounded from the side, kneel down, kowtow, and apologize. Then you can take her away. Zane turned to look at him. He seemed sober, his eyes dark and menacing. You think you can make my bro kneel and apologize? Do you think you're worthy? A voice echoed. A coarse voice, bald head, single eye. It was Mr. Six. Mr. Six noticed that Zane hadn't returned for quite a while. He thought Zane might have gotten lost, so he immediately followed Connor Borer outside. Just as he stepped out, he heard Zach ordering Zane to kneel and apologize. Mr. Six. The KTV manager was dumbfounded and stammered in his speech. Mr. Six turned his head to look at the KTV manager with a calm gaze, but that calm look almost made the manager wet his pants in fear. I ask you, who made my bro kneel and apologize? It was me. Zach Bear adjusted his clothes. He wasn't very afraid of Mr. Six and said coldly, I was with a woman, and he barged in without saying a word and even cracked my head open. Mr. Six, you're a man of the underworld, you should understand justice, right? For these two things, making him kneel and apologize isn't too much, is it? Mr. Six laughed. I wondered who it was, turns out it's young Master Bear. Zach Bear looked coldly at Mr. Six. Mr. Six put away his smile and looked at Zach with a faint smile. The underworld does indeed talk about justice, but when have I, Tristan Dunn, ever talked about justice? In my eyes, fists are justice. Young Master Bear, do you want to taste my fists? As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of many footsteps came from the direction of the stairs. Zach Bear's face changed, his expression became venomous. Mr. Six, are you sure you want to turn against me over this? Mr. Six picked at his ear, impatiently saying, even if your father stood in front of me, I wouldn't be scared. Let alone a kid like you. What right do you have to talk about turning against me? If you know what's good for you, get lost immediately, otherwise, you won't be able to leave later. The door to the stairs was pushed open, and a group of people rushed in. They were different from small-time thugs, they were Mr. Six's men. These were real tough guys who had seen blood. Zach Bear gritted his teeth. Fine, Tristan Dunn, you've got guts. Let's go. After saying that, he glared fiercely at Zane and left with his two friends. After they left, Mr. Six turned his gaze to the KTV manager. Do you have any objections? No objections. The KTV manager dared not offend Mr. Six and replied with a bitter face. Everyone disperse. The small-time thugs immediately left, fearing the KTV manager might change his mind. They dared to lay hands on Zane, but not on Mr. Six, who was a real tough character. Mr. Six, I'll get back to work now? Yeah, go ahead. Mr. Six said indifferently. Wait, make sure her salary is paid. The KTV manager glanced at Mr. Six, saw no reaction, and reluctantly took out his phone to transfer money to April Salazar. After doing all this, he finally left. After they were gone, Zane said to Mr. Six, Mr. Six, thank you. Hey, no need for thanks, we're brothers. Also, don't call me Mr. Six anymore, just call me Tristan, I'm older than you. Alright, Tristan, I owe you one. If you ever need anything, just ask, I won't refuse. Great, those words are worth it. Mr. Six said with a smile. Zane said, alright, Mr. Six, we'll leave now. Okay, keep in touch. Zane nodded, holding April's wrist as they walked out. April hadn't spoken the entire time. She was shocked that Zane knew someone like Mr. Six, but thinking about the countless money she'd have to face next made her face pale. Zane didn't know what she was thinking, so he asked which hospital her mother was in and took a cab there. On the way, April told Zane that she dropped out of high school. Her father was a gambler and had lost all the family's money. Her mother was diagnosed with leukemia. It was an insatiable disease. To pay for her mother's treatment, she had resolutely entered the adult entertainment industry. She worked as a KTV hostess. She drank but didn't sell herself. But even the money she made wasn't enough for her mother's treatment. Not to mention, she had a gambling father and a younger brother in school. Tonight, she had decided to fully enter the industry and sell herself. But at the last moment, she regretted it, refused Zach Bear, and ran away. As a result, she was caught by Zach, and then Zane showed up. After hearing this, Zane let out a long sigh. This was the legendary gambling father, sick mother, schooling brother, and broken her. Zane felt only gratitude towards her. He had many flaws, but his only merit was being grateful. He felt he should help April, especially now that he seemed capable of doing so. Arriving at the hospital, Zane didn't enter the ward but stood outside the window, quietly watching. April's mother, tormented by the disease to the point of being unrecognizable, seemed to understand her daughter's pain, tenderly touching her face. After a while, mother and daughter embraced and cried bitterly. Soon, April's mother fell asleep, and she came out, showing Zane an apologetic smile. Zane took out a card that Ginny had given him. They had been married for 3 years, and every year, Ginny deposited $300,000 on this card. There was a total of $900,000 on it. Zane handed it to her. I don't know if this money is enough. If it's not, let me know. After a pause, he continued, that kind of place isn't for you. Find a proper job. After speaking, he turned to leave. April called out to Zane, her eyes full of tears. She wanted to refuse with dignity, but that would cost her mother's life. She accepted it and then loudly told Zane, I will repay this money. Zane waved his hand, said nothing, and quickly left the hospital. Heron Group's chairman's office, Faith Heron stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the bustling traffic and flashing neon lights. City J is not particularly large, but it has a long history and a large population. Moreover, the power dynamics here are very complex. Establishing a foothold in this city is not an easy task. Faith Heron sighed softly. Although she was indeed the chairman of Heron Group and had her grandfather's unwavering support, the group only superficially listened to her. In reality, they completely disregarded her behind her back. Simply put, they were two-faced. Because she was a woman. Heron Group's entry into City J was a result of her careful consideration. Not only did she need to establish a firm foothold in City J, but she also had to expand and strengthen the company, so that those people would have nothing to say. Ms. Heron, Tristan Dunn's final payment has been settled. The assistant walked in, eyes filled with joy. Faith was somewhat surprised. She had great faith in her grandfather's judgment, but Zane Soulsby seemed too ordinary, so ordinary that she doubted her grandfather had been fooled by him. But now, it seemed that experience indeed triumphs over youth. Her grandfather must have known something she didn't. At this moment, Faith felt a bit curious about Zane Soulsby. Glenn, I have a task for you. Do it immediately, and remember, don't let anyone find out. Faith said. She needed to fulfill the promise she made to Zane. Glenn's eyes widened slightly in disbelief and said, Ms. Heron, doing this might cause us a significant financial loss. Just do it. Glenn reluctantly responded and walked out. Soon, Faith was alone in her office. She rubbed her temples and then took out her phone to call Zane Soulsby. Shortly after, the call connected. Mr. Soulsby, I apologize for disturbing you so late. I sincerely invite you to join my company's security department as the head. I hope you will accept. Zane smiled and declined. I appreciate your offer, Ms. Heron, but I currently have no intention of taking a job. Faith sighed inwardly and then smiled. All right, whenever you decide to join, my door will always be open for you. Okay. Faith hung up the phone, knowing that Zane had seen through her actions. She regretted not listening to her grandfather's numerous warnings to befriend Zane without any ulterior motives. She hadn't heeded the advice. Now, Faith could feel Zane's growing distance from her. Experience indeed triumphs over youth. Faith Heron muttered, putting her phone in her pocket and silently looking out the window. Zane put his phone away, a smile forming at the corner of his mouth. He knew that Faith had received the money and had started to believe in his abilities. However, Zane didn't care much. He and Faith didn't have much interaction. After this matter, he planned to keep his distance from her, just as Ginny had advised. People from the capital were not easy to deal with. Returning home, the lights were still on. The noodles on the table had gone cold. She hadn't eaten them. Zane felt a pang of heartache as he walked over. Ginny sat in front of the computer, diligently working. Her dedication to her career was overwhelming, so overwhelming that it made Zane feel pained. Zane walked over and closed the laptop. Ginny frowned. "What are you doing? Have a dinner first." Ginny raised an eyebrow and was about to speak, but seeing Zane's stern expression, she swallowed her words. Zane saw her obediently follow him. He smiled and made her a fresh bowl of noodles. Ginny ate quickly, clearly still thinking about her work. Zane knew he couldn't change her nature and could only watch her work. Before he knew it, he had dozed off. The same scene replayed in his mind, but with more details. He could even recall some names. However, when he woke up, the names left him shocked. Too unbelievable. Fushi, Nua? Zane rubbed his forehead, unexpectedly finding that his mind was filled with new knowledge, seemingly cultivation techniques. Moreover, he could feel his body becoming stronger. Even the flame he summoned seemed to have changed color. Zane didn't know what had happened to his body, but since it was a positive change, he didn't panic. He looked at the memories in his mind and murmured, "Alchemy, lousy?" Bang! A muffled sound came from beside him. Zane turned his head and saw Ginny's face turn livid as she angrily threw her phone on the ground. What happened? Zane quickly walked over. Just as he was about to place his hand on her shoulder, he realized that he had slept in Ginny's room last night. But judging by her appearance, it seemed she hadn't slept all night. Grace King, that useless person, not only got tricked but also created a nearly $2 billion deficit. Zane was stunned for a moment and then asked, "Who tricked Grace King?" Heron Group. Ginny's face was very unpleasant. Zane understood that Faith Heron had made her move. However, he didn't say anything. Given Faith's actions, it wouldn't take 3 days before people from the King Group would actively seek Ginny to return and take charge. As Zane had predicted, the next day, Ginny's phone rang. The caller was Grace King. As soon as the call connected, Grace's sobbing voice came through, "Sis, you have to save the King Group." Ginny asked coldly, "What's going on?" "Sis, not only did the Heron Group trick us, but all our downstream factories have also shut down. At this rate, not only will we be unable to fill the gap, but we won't even be able to supply the Phaeton Group." "What?" Ginny exclaimed. The Phaeton Group had been collaborating with the King Group for a long time. If there were any problems, the Phaeton Group would undoubtedly drop them immediately. After all, many companies now produce the same products, and their prices are lower, even though their quality isn't as good as the King Group's. But who cares about quality when there's money to be made? If it weren't for their decade-long partnership with the King Group, the Phaeton Group would have chosen another supplier long ago. You idiot! Couldn't you check who you were signing contracts with? Couldn't you consider things more carefully? Now that there's a problem, you come to me? Please don't scold me. Grandma said you should come back to be the president again. I'll resign. Grace was very aggrieved, her voice choked with sobs. Ginny snorted coldly and said, "The one who drove me away was her, and now the one asking me to come back is also her. I'm just one person, not a puppet." Grace fell silent. After a while, she said, "We'll give you an additional 7% of the shares." Ginny was silent for a moment before saying, "Notify everyone to have a meeting." Grace smiled, her voice becoming cheerful. "Okay, I know. I'll notify them immediately." After hanging up the phone, Ginny rubbed her temples. Although she seemed very angry, the upturned corners of her mouth showed she was in a good mood. Seeing her like this, Zane also smiled. "Zane, I'm going to the company. I might be busy until very late tonight, so you don't need to wait for me for dinner." "All right." Ginny was a person of action. After speaking, she got dressed and went out. The large villa was once again left with only Zane. Zane was about to tidy up the room when his phone rang. He took out his phone and saw that the caller was Mr. Six. Zane was a bit curious. Why was Mr. Six calling him at this time? He answered the call, and a cold, unfamiliar voice came through the receiver. "If you want Tristan Dunn to live, come to the North City immediately." Zane's face darkened. The voice belonged to Zach Bear. He looked at the phone, which had already been hung up, and a flash of killing intent appeared in his eyes. He hadn't expected Zach to be so bold as to kidnap Mr. Six. Without any hesitation, he grabbed the car keys from the shoe cabinet. His car was a $13,000 Barra, bought when he got married. He got in the car and sped all the way. When he arrived in North City, he received a text message from Mr. Six with the address. Without hesitation, Zane drove to the outskirts. After driving for a while, he saw two men squatting by the road, talking and laughing, seemingly smoking. Zane stopped the car next to them and got out. "Where's Zach Bear?" The thinner man sized Zane up and then said, "Follow me." They walked ahead, and Zane followed behind. They passed through a patch of reeds and saw an unfinished building in the distance. Many people were standing below the building, roughly 30 or so. Zane was pushed into the unfinished building. Mr. Six was tied to the wall, his face bruised and swollen. His eyes were filled with guilt. Zane thought he felt guilty because he had come alone, but he soon realized the real reason. A faint groan came from the side. Zane turned his head and his expression changed drastically. April Salazar was tied naked to a chair, with a man writhing on top of her. Opposite her, Zach Bear sat quietly, smiling. Boom! A muffled sound suddenly exploded in Zane's mind. His eyes instantly turned red. "Stop it!" Zane roared, but the man ignored him and instead gave him a mocking smile. The man moved even faster. April's face was full of tears, her eyes empty. "Die!" Zane shouted angrily and moved, but a gun was pointed at his head. Zach stood up, smiling as he said, "Not bad. I thought after she left with you that day, you would take her virgin. But you didn't. I have to say, you're really something." Zane's eyes grew colder, and no one noticed that his hand was already engulfed in flames. "Guy, kneel down and apologize now, and I might consider leaving you a whole corpse." Zach smiled. He had nearly 50 men here, with 20 guns among them. And Zane was alone. Now, in this dilapidated building, he was the god. "Die!" Zane suddenly moved, grabbing the gun. The man was startled and instinctively fired, but found his gun melting instantly. The next moment, a terrifying heat wave swept over. Then, the man was engulfed in flames. In an instant, a living person vanished into thin air. Zach saw this scene, his eyes widened, and his gaze was full of shock. Zane moved, his body appearing next to April as if by instant teleportation. His palm reached out, grabbing the person. In midair, the person's body ignited, not even having time to scream before turning into ashes. This scene made Mr. Six's eyes widen in disbelief. At the same time, he secretly felt fortunate that he hadn't completely offended him. Others heard the commotion, each pulling out a handgun, ready to shoot at Zane. Zane clenched his palm, and suddenly, countless sparks burst out. The sparks shot towards the surrounding people. As soon as the sparks touched them, their bodies instantly caught fire, and the iron pieces in their hands melted into liquid. In an instant, nearly 50 people were turned into ashes. A breeze blew. Ashes were everywhere. Zach's face turned pale, his smile completely frozen on his face. Mr. Six was the same. Zane ignored them and walked to April, looking at her disheveled state. He could hardly imagine what kind of humiliation she had suffered. Zane took off his coat and covered it over her. Feeling the warmth, April turned her head, looking at Zane's face, and her empty eyes filled with hatred. She suddenly sat up and slapped Zane in the face. Zane silently endured it. Although he didn't understand why, judging by Zach's attitude, it was apparent that April had been targeted as a form of retaliation against him. "I'm sorry." "Wow." The next moment, April burst into tears, her arms tightly wrapped around Zane's neck, crying out loud. Zane raised his hand, wanting to pat her back to comfort her. But no matter how he tried, he couldn't bring his hand down. She cried for a long time before finally stopping. She crawled out of Zane's embrace, her eyes immediately locking onto Zach, who was full of fear. "I want to kill him." Zane nodded forcefully, his body flashing as he appeared beside Zach, kicking his leg. With a cracking sound, Zach knelt on the ground, his leg broken. Afterward, Zane broke his other 3 limbs. Only when Zach couldn't move anymore did Zane step aside. Zach, pale and bloodless, looked at April with pleading eyes, unable to speak due to the intense pain. His eyes were filled with a desperate desire to live. April screamed and grabbed a nearby brick, pouncing on him. She struck his head with all her might. Once, twice, 3 times. No one knew how many times, but even when Zach's face was unrecognizable, she didn't stop. In the past 2 hours, she had endured endless torture and humiliation. One man after another. "Miss Salazar, he's already dead." Mr. Six couldn't help but speak up. Zane walked over and untied the rope around Mr. Six. Mr. Six stood aside, looking at Zane with awe in his eyes. "Let her vent." Zane didn't smoke, but the current scene made him want to. He took out one of Mr. Six's cigarettes and lit it. Bro, this is my fault. I've always been arrogant in J City and didn't expect this little bastard to dare to kidnap me. If I hadn't been tied up, she wouldn't have been taken by that bastard, and she wouldn't have. Zane interrupted him, saying, Mr. Six, this isn't your fault. It's my fault for not seeing through that scumbag's black heart earlier. If I had noticed sooner, I would have. At this point, Zane couldn't continue. Simply put, he hadn't expected Zach Bear to have the guts to kidnap someone so brazenly. Bro, no more words. You saved my life. From now on, whatever you need, I'll go through fire and water without hesitation. Zane nodded and silently watched April vent her anger. She vented for a long time until she finally fainted from exhaustion. Zane picked her up and shot a flame, burning Zach's body to ashes. A breeze blew, leaving no remains. Let's go. Zane walked ahead silently, with Mr. Six following behind. In a brightly lit room, Zane and Mr. Six sat on a sofa, while the latter's lover served them tea. Zane didn't speak, and neither did Mr. Six. Even someone like him, who had been in the underworld, seldom saw such things. He could understand Zane's feelings. Bro, what do you plan to do next? Zane pressed the cigarette butt into the ashtray and said, April got involved because of me. If I let this go, it's not only unfair to her but also against my conscience. Mr. Six understood, pursed his lips, and said, the Bear family has considerable influence in J City, and they have connections in the underworld. Going against them won't be easy. Zane looked at him and said, if I want to kill someone, not even the ends of the earth will stop me. Mr. Six thought of Zane's black flame and nodded in agreement. The Bear family indeed had significant influence, but in front of Zane, everyone was powerless. However, he didn't understand how Zane planned to proceed. I want to destroy the Bear family, and all their women must experience April's pain. Zane said coldly. He noticed his mindset had changed, becoming somewhat cold. Perhaps this was thanks to April. But Zane didn't know if this was a good or bad thing. In any case, he only wanted revenge for April now. Everyone in the underworld knew not to involve family. But Zach had targeted his friends to get to him. So Zane wouldn't show mercy either. Whatever Zach did to April, he'd do the same to the Bear family women. I have some influence. Just say the word, and use it as you need. Mr. Six quickly pledged his loyalty. The beautiful woman beside him looked at Zane in surprise. Zane rubbed his forehead and said, do me a favor. Please, go ahead. Spread the word that it was me who killed Zach Bear. Mr. Six understood. The Bear family would focus all their attention on Zane, so they wouldn't investigate or trace anything back to April Salazar. But doing this, the police. Mr. Six hesitated. There's no evidence, is there? Mr. Six nodded and said, leave it to me. Zane was about to speak when April walked out. Her movements were still a bit awkward, and her walking posture was very unnatural. Her eyes were very red, but she was very calm. You. Zane stood up, somewhat flustered, not knowing what to say. I'm going to work. April said, then walked out. Zane didn't say anything and followed her. Mr. Six hurriedly followed as well. Soon, Zane was surprised to find that April was walking in the direction of Galaxy KTV. Zane frowned and quickly walked over, stopping her. You're still going to work here? April softly said, the money you gave me was taken by my dad and lost in gambling. My mom is still in the hospital. If I don't earn money here, where else can I earn? After a pause, she continued, I know what you mean, and I really appreciate your help. I will pay you back that money. It's not about the money. April interrupted Zane, her voice very light. I am already tainted, aren't I? Zane opened his mouth but found himself unable to say anything. April looked at Zane and smiled slightly. I don't hate you. This is my fate. But don't stop me. I have to stay here and work. If you continue to stop me, I'm afraid I will start to hate you. Zane remained silent. April turned around and walked into Galaxy KTV without looking back. Zane, don't worry, as long as I'm here, no one will dare to bully her. Mr. Six knew what he had to do. Zane took a deep breath and said softly, thank you. This is what I should do. Mr. Six was very respectful to Zane. Zane knew what he was thinking. Seeing him use the flame indicated that he was not an ordinary person, and he also wanted to enter the world of extraordinary people. Looking up, he took a deep breath and turned to leave. Mr. Six watched Zane's departing figure for a moment, then took out his phone and made a call. Spread the word that Zach Bear was killed by Zane Soulsby. Yes. Send a few capable brothers to Galaxy KTV to protect a girl named April Salazar. Remember, if anyone dares to touch her, cut off their hands. Understood, Mr. Six. Move all the liquid funds from the account. Something big might happen next. Got it, Mr. Six. With these orders passed down, the underground world of J City was thrown into complete chaos. Bear family. With an expressionless face, Wadsworth Bear listened to his subordinate's report. After dismissing them, he kept calling Zach. But the result was always the same, the phone was off. He believed the rumors. His son was dead, his only son was dead. Wadsworth Bear angrily smashed everything in the room to pieces. After venting his anger, he took out his phone. I want all the information on Zane Soulsby, and I want it fast. Yes. After hanging up the phone, Wadsworth sat on the sofa with his eyes closed. Tears rolled down his cheeks. After a while, his phone rang. Mr. Bear, Zane Soulsby is an ordinary person, not someone from the underworld. But he has a good relationship with Mr. Six. Tristan Dunn? Yes. Wadsworth Bear hung up the phone, his face twisted. Tristan Dunn, you'd better stay out of this, or I'll risk everything to take you down with me. The underground world of J City had 4 major forces. In the east was Godfrey Mock. In the west was Tristan Dunn, also known as Mr. Six. In the north was the Bear family. In the south was the 5 Lakes gang. Mr. Six was very fierce when he was young, completely reckless. This also led to him being the head of the 4 major forces, with his power slightly surpassing the others. But only slightly. To move against any of them, Mr. Six couldn't do it alone. But that was before. Now, having decided to follow Zane, Mr. Six believed he had the chance to unify the underground world of J City. When Zane returned home, it was already dark. He lay on the sofa, with April's empty eyes flashing in his mind, making his heart ache. She was just a friend. If it had happened to Ginny, he felt he would go crazy. This world was too big, and there were too many people. He had skills but lacked the help of others. The things that happened today might happen to Ginny in the future. He had to become stronger. Thinking of this, various cultivation methods flashed through his mind. There were too many, and they were too complicated. He didn't know which method to cultivate. While Zane was struggling with which cultivation method to choose, car lights flashed outside, and then Ginny walked in, looking exhausted. Zane quickly stood up and asked, "Have you eaten?" Ginny shook her head. After changing her shoes, she put her bag on the table, sat on the sofa, and stared blankly, her eyes full of anger. Seeing this, Zane understood that Ginny had encountered trouble. Zane placed the fried rice in front of her and asked, "Did something happen at the company?" Ginny looked at Zane and said softly, "All the employees of the downstream factory went on strike." She didn't hide anything and explained the pros and cons of the cooperation with the Phaeton Group. Zane frowned and asked, "Why would the factory suddenly go on strike for no reason? Is someone behind this?" "Yes." "Who?" "The Bear family." Ginny sighed and said softly, "You don't need to worry about this. I'll handle it." A glint of light flashed in Zane's eyes, and he asked, "Is it the Bear family, one of the 4 major forces in the underground world of J City?" Ginny raised her head and looked at Zane in surprise. "You even know about this?" "Yes, I know a little, but not much." Ginny nodded and said helplessly, "As legitimate businessmen, the thing we fear most is getting involved with the underground forces. If we get too close, the police will watch us. If we keep our distance, they will make things difficult for us." Zane nodded. This was the reason why he hadn't completely fallen out with Mr. Six before. "Honestly, I don't know when our king group offended the Bear family. Why did they suddenly start causing trouble for us?" Ginny poked at the fried rice with her chopsticks, feeling very down. "Don't worry, everything will work out eventually. We'll find a solution." Ginny nodded. Just as she took a bite of her meal, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, frowned slightly, then put down her chopsticks and walked to the balcony to answer the call. Zane also took out his phone and made a call to Mr. Six. The call connected, and Mr. Six's voice came through. "Zane, I've arranged everything as you instructed. Also, I've prepared the available funds in the account, not much, a total of 80 million. Whenever you need it, just say the word. Zane was taken aback. He hadn't expected Mr. Six to be so thoroughly loyal. If it were before, he might have hypocritically refused, but now he didn't. After a brief acknowledgement, he said, Mr. Six, I need you to investigate why the Bear family is giving the King Group a hard time. Mr. Six asked, what's your relationship with the King Group? The CEO of the King Group is my wife. Got it, I'll get back to you with the information soon. All right. Hanging up the phone, Ginny walked over just in time. Her face looked somewhat troubled. She sat at the dining table, eating silently, without saying a word for a long time. After a while, she raised her head and said, there's an issue at my company, I need to go out for a bit. Zane frowned and said, it's so late, can't it wait until tomorrow? Ginny replied in distress, it's about the factory. If I don't handle it soon, I won't be able to sleep at all. Zane felt a bit worried, do you want me to go with you? No need, you just get some rest at home. Zane nodded slightly, alright, I'll be off then. I'll put the food in the fridge and heat it up myself when I get back. Okay. Ginny picked up her bag and walked out quickly. Zane stood by the window, watching her car's tail lights. After hesitating for a moment, he also grabbed his car keys and followed her out. Once bitten by a snake, 10 years afraid of a well rope. He feared that what happened to April might happen to Ginny. Ginny drove her car fast, showing her urgency. Soon, she parked her car in front of a restaurant. Zane found a parking spot and backed his car in. Just as he turned off his engine, he noticed a Mercedes-Benz G-Class driving up. After it parked, someone got out of the car. William Mercer. Seeing him, Zane's expression turned sour. Why was he here? Could it be? A troubling thought surfaced in Zane's mind. Initially, he planned to wait in the car, but now, he decided to get out. As he walked into the restaurant, he quickly spotted William Mercer and Ginny sitting at a table together. William had a full smile on his face, and the love in his eyes seemed enough to melt ice. Though Zane couldn't see Ginny's expression, seeing William's smile suggested their conversation was going well. Zane quietly retreated. If it weren't for Ginny's insistence on keeping him despite everything, including the King Group, Zane would have immediately gone over to ask what was going on and then talk about divorce. But now, he chose to trust her. He believed there was nothing between them, and that she would explain everything when she got home. He sat at a hidden table from where he could see Ginny and William, but they couldn't see him. A waiter approached and politely asked, Sir, would you like to order something? Zane picked up the menu and randomly ordered a couple of dishes, then quietly watched them. Tell me, what do you know about the factory situation? Ginny's face was icy cold, with no desire to touch the luxurious feast on the table. William looked at her cold face and indifferent tone, and a hint of pain flashed across his face. Ginny, when did our relationship become like this? Didn't you once say that you would only love me in this lifetime? Ginny's lips curled into a mocking smile. That was in the past. But Ginny, I had a real reason for going abroad back then. I didn't really want to abandon. William, do you know why the Bear family is targeting the factory? If you don't know, I'm leaving. My husband is waiting for me at home. William's eyes turned cold, then he unwillingly asked, he's just an ordinary person. He doesn't have money, he doesn't have looks. Why did you choose him over me? Just look at now, the group is in big trouble, and he can't help you at all, but I can. Ginny picked up her bag and was about to leave. William quickly held her down and said, all right, I won't say any more, okay? Ginny sat back down and asked, tell me then, why is the Bear family targeting the factory? William said, I used my connections to reach out to the head of the Bear family, Wadsworth Bear. He said your King Group was too much, doing business in their territory without giving them any kickbacks, and not visiting them even once all these years. So, he ordered his men to harass your factory workers. Ginny frowned and asked, so the workers aren't showing up because they're afraid of the Bear family's harassment? Yes. I understand. I'll visit him personally tomorrow. William smiled, Ginny, this is your biggest flaw, pride and arrogance. The Bear family might not be as rich as the King Group, but they have more people, and they're all desperados. Frankly speaking, your social status doesn't match theirs. Why do you think you can just visit them? Moreover, they're angry at your King Group now. If you go there rashly, he won't see you. Ginny's face was somewhat unsightly. After a moment, she looked at the smile on William's face and her heart stirred. Do you have a way for me to meet him? I do, but I have one condition, and that is you accompany me to finish this meal. Don't be in a hurry to leave, just simply accompany me for a meal, so I have something to remember by. He paused and continued, a meal in exchange for the normal operations of the King Group, I think it's worth it. Ginny hesitated for a moment and asked, just a simple meal? Of course, you chose this restaurant. Even if I had any inappropriate thoughts, I couldn't do anything. Thinking it over, Ginny felt that he made sense. She sat back down, quietly accompanying him for the meal. She had made up her mind, no matter what William said, she wouldn't respond. William saw this, a flash of shadow crossed his eyes, then he smiled and said, Ginny, congratulations, in just 2 days you return to the King Group. Ginny didn't speak, she also felt lucky. Although she was certain she would eventually return to the King Group, she hadn't expected it to be in just 2 short days. By the way, I'm suddenly very curious about something. Faith Heron, the chairman of the Heron Group, has a good relationship with Zane Soulsby, right? She even went so far as to use her own reputation to stand up for him. Why would she suddenly set up the King Group? Hearing Faith Heron's name, a hint of disgust flashed in Ginny's eyes. But after listening to William's words, Ginny also felt a bit strange. Could it be that she acted because she hated the King Group's tendency to discard people once their usefulness ended? You don't know? William was somewhat surprised. Ginny frowned and said, how could I guess the mind of someone like Miss Heron? But no matter what, because she set up the King Group, the losses were heavy, and your grandma had no choice but to call you back. In a way, she helped you. Ginny's heart stirred, she didn't think Faith Heron would help her. Could it be for Zane's sake? Impossible. How could a businessperson like her help someone for no reason? Oh, right, I heard that Faith Heron caused the King Group nearly 40 million in losses this time. Upon hearing this, Ginny stood up abruptly. Her face was extremely unsightly. Zane asked her to do it. William was stunned, then suddenly understood, that makes sense. Miss Heron would certainly not mind a mere 40 million for Zane's sake. Hearing this, Ginny decisively picked up her bag and turned to leave. This time, William did not stop her. He understood Ginny, she was proud, even to the point of arrogance. Being helped by someone, she might feel grateful in her heart. But it depended on who the person was. Last time he could tell, Ginny valued Zane Soulsby greatly and disliked Faith Heron. She even vaguely considered Faith Heron a rival in love. Now that her rival had helped her in the King Group, how could her proud nature tolerate it? She would surely have a big fight with Zane when she got back. Then, tomorrow's dinner. Thinking of this, a smile appeared at the corner of William's mouth. Greed, desire. Like a vile ghost. When Ginny returned home, she saw Zane sitting on the sofa, looking displeased. Zane, did you ask Faith Heron to help me? Ginny questioned loudly. Zane didn't answer but asked in return, did you just go to the company? I'm asking you if you asked Faith Heron to help me? Ginny shouted. Zane's face darkened, I'm also asking you, did you just go to the company? Answer me. Looking at Ginny's angry, fiery eyes, Zane took a deep breath. Yes, I asked Faith Heron. Who allowed you to make decisions on your own? Zane said in a deep voice, I know you value the King Group, so I asked her. Ginny, don't tell me I did something wrong. Ginny's anger froze, then she revealed a bitter smile. He did it for her good. But he didn't understand her. She was clearly her rival in love, yet he went to ask her rival for help. Wasn't that humiliating her? I don't want to argue with you. I think we need to cool off for a while. I'll stay at my friend's place for a bit. When we've calmed down, I'll come back on my own. You don't need to pick me up. Ginny's face was pale, her eyes full of deep disappointment. Zane's eyebrows raised in anger. Are you really going to your friend's place? I think you're going to find your idealized lover. What did you say? Ginny was in disbelief, looking at Zane. Did he really think of her that way? Zane angrily said, do you dare swear that you just went to the company? Looking at Zane's angry face, Ginny's eyes gradually turned cold. Does where I go have anything to do with you? Does it have anything to do with me? Zane's body shook, and he laughed at himself. He had been worried about her, silently protecting her safety despite his own discomfort. But she asked if it had anything to do with him? Zane closed his eyes, not wanting to say another word. Ginny glared at Zane for a moment, then picked up her bag and turned to leave. Watching her back, Zane's eyes flashed with a trace of pain. After a moment, he took out his phone and dialed a number for Mr. Six. Zane, What do you need me to do? Please send 2 smart guys to S Road, J Garden to protect someone for me. Who? Ginny King from the King Group. Got it. Hanging up the phone, he let out a long breath. He believed Ginny would not betray him, but those words still hurt him. What does it have to do with you? That sentence, so simple to say, yet so hurtful. Zane closed his eyes. After a moment, he opened them again. He needed a drink. He needed to get drunk. Only by getting drunk could he forget the hurtful words Ginny had said to him. He picked up his car keys and drove away from the villa. Originally, he intended to find a restaurant, but somehow, he unknowingly drove to the Galaxy KTV. Looking at the decor in front of him, he hesitated for a moment but still walked in. Hey, Mr. Soulsby. The KTV manager saw Zane and walked over with a fawning smile. He dared not resent Zane now because when April Salazar came back, Mr. Six had actually sent people to protect her. Having been a manager for so long, he wasn't foolish and immediately understood that Mr. Six did it for Zane Soulsby. As for the conflict that day, although he was very angry and hated Zane at the time, 2 days had passed, and he seriously considered himself stupid for daring to hate Mr. Six's friend. Originally, he wanted to apologize in person. Seeing Zane coming over now, he hurriedly walked over, practically groveling. Quick, get a private room for Mr. Soulsby and inform Miss Salazar that Mr. Soulsby is here. Zane waved his hand and said, No need, just let me have some quiet time alone. What do you need, Mr. Soulsby? I'll arrange it for you. Liquor. The KTV manager carefully observed Zane, seeing the pain in his eyes, and understood. He was here to drown his sorrows in alcohol. You two, take Mr. Soulsby to a private room immediately, and you go get him some liquor. The bill goes on me. Yes, manager. Zane glanced at him but said nothing more.